Self-sufficiency. So good morning, everyone. I think the previous panel was a perfect introduction to this one, which is a roundtable with a question of what can responsible and just artificial intelligence governance look like. Before introducing the panel, I thought I would get you started with maybe the slides. Yeah, so these are the 11 risks of ChatGPT as identified by OpenAI. Okay, hallucinations, disinformation, cybersecurity, economic impacts, proliferation of conventional and unconventional weapons, harmful content, privacy issues. So, you know, we were discussing some of those in the previous sections. You would think, well, why would we use ChatGPT? So yesterday, I thought of asking just ChatGPT, what are the Bergen exchanges? Because I thought that would, you know, give us an answer as to, well, is it worth even using this technology? And this is what ChatGPT says. The Bergen exchanges are a series of annual academic conferences focused on human rights law and conflict. These conferences take place in Bergen, Norway, are hosted by the University of Bergen's Center for Human Rights. It's a slide, you know. The events bring together scholars, practitioners, and students from around the world to discuss various aspects of human rights, with particular emphasis on international law, transitional justice, and the challenges faced by conflict zones. And then it goes on. Each year, the Bergen exchanges, and it says that, you know, they are known for their critical and reflective approach to human rights, often challenging mainstream perspectives and encouraging innovative thinking about how to protect and promote human rights in complex and rapidly changing global contexts. I mean, you gotta say, I'm sure that those of you who weren't using ChatGPT are going to start using ChatGPT now. But of course, there are a few things to correct, but I think, you know, not bad for a first try. So of course, then the question is, if we are going to be using this technology, and the person was also saying technology is not going anywhere, the question is how to do it in an ethical way. Before starting the conversation, I just wanted to put a couple of slides showing you, for those of you interested, some of the framing documents about this conversations. You have the ethics guidelines for trustworthy AI, European Union, 2019, talking about lawful, ethical, and robust AI. Those then have been spelled out in some indicators like human agency and oversight, robustness and safety, privacy and data governance, transparency, diversity, non-discrimination and fairness, societal and environmental well-being, and accountability. These are the UNESCO. This is the UNESCO attempt to produce a worldwide document, the ethics of artificial intelligence. Also, for those of you who are not following this, just to let you know that there's now, since May 2000 this year, the Council of Europe approved the first international convention. It's the Framework Convention on Artificial Intelligence and Human Rights, Democracy, and Rule of Law. And of course, the European AI Act. I'm not going to go into this. Some of my speakers will, but I will let the slide sit there so that she can use it. So to discuss these, you know, really interesting topic, we have wonderful speakers today. We have Melody Musoni, who is a Bergen alumni, right, Melody? But currently she's a digital policy officer at ECDPM, working on data and digital governance in Africa. We have Marija, Slavkovik, University of Bergen, working precisely on AI and ethics, and very much concerned with how you know, you can develop this field while taking into account both the technological and societal approaches to attaining responsible and human-centered AI. And we have to my left my co-patriot Asun, who works on climate change. She's in digital assurance DNA research. She's also a leading researcher at the Earth Science in Barcelona Supercomputing Center. And I'm going to start with Marija, and I'm going to ask her maybe to very briefly give us a snapshot about the various approaches and governance that are being discussed. So it's USA, the United States, Europe, and China. Asun will then zoom into Europe, but maybe just the first take of it.
Right. So first of all, thank you for having me here, and I apologize for my voice. So I will be leaning forward so you can hear me. So I'm an AI researcher. I'm a computer scientist. So that's the perspective I take from. And what is very interesting that we see with artificial intelligence is how much projection of human values, relationships, interests we put on it. And what is also very interesting is that unlike policies, unlike culture, artificial intelligence and computer technology in general is the same across the globe. So wherever you go, there is pretty much the same product. And it is very global as well. I mean, it is produced in one location, assembled in another location. Software is developed globally. So software developers are hired in country A from country B to develop a software that will be used in country C. And yet, whenever we talk about artificial intelligence and going forward with the technology, we are talking about it as if there are these three camps, which is the American perspective, the Asian perspective, specifically the Chinese perspective, and the European perspective. And what is very interesting here is that using exactly the same technology, the same apps, the same artifacts, all of these three regions have been developing different ways of how to use it. So you have this extreme individualism in the United States and the American continent in general. You have this extreme collectivism in China. So what I mean by that extreme collectivism is that there is one central authority that decides how the technology will be used, in which way, by whom, who can change it, and so on. Whereas it's completely opposite in the United States. You have a complete market, open market, in which venture capitalists decide which technology is going to be developed, how it's going to be used, and so on. And then we have Europe, and we have not really kind of found exactly our place in between these two things, because on one hand, we are not as individualists as the Americans, and we are not as, so what is the opposite here? Is society oriented as, yes, communitarian is the Chinese, right? So we have a lot of these regulations and new laws, but we don't, I'm not convinced that we actually know what we want and how we want to accomplish it. So we see these, there is a new one from OECD, by the way, Trust with AI, recently dropped during the summer. We see all of these calls for trust with AI and human-centered AI and so on. It's not exactly clear on the ground how the operation is. We were lucky with the GDPR because it proved to have a signaling effect. And because Europe is such a rich and important market, it pulled a lot of the industry to implement it and respect it to an extent. And I know that there is hope that the AI Act will have the same effect. Question is, we have to figure out who we are in respect to it.
Well, thank you. Let me now turn to Melody and maybe ask Melody to take on the African perspective. What is happening in Africa on AI governance?
Thank you. So let's pick up from where you've left, and I think you did a good job there by showing some of the frameworks that we have. So you see a lot of regulatory frameworks we have on AI. They are developed by the Western world, the global North. And one of the issues that African actors have is the absence of African voices, especially when it comes to dialogue and discussion around the development of global AI governance frameworks. And if you look at the OECD, UNESCO, of course, there has been a bit of input from African actors. And now we are talking about the EU AI Act. And like we said, with the GDPR, we saw that Brussels effect and a lot of African countries jumping in to adopt a framework that didn't really reflect their own position and their own context. So that's the first thing that I wanted to highlight, that in Africa, there is that question of our voices, our context, our interests, our values and norms being represented at a global level, and what do we need to do going forward to make sure that our voices are heard and there's a replication or a reflection of our values and norms. And the second issue, again, when we are talking about AI governance from an African perspective, is again who is dominating the AI and data markets. So if you look in Africa, it's predominantly big tech who are also foreign owned, and a lot of them are not really operating from Africa. They just come in, collect data that is relevant for them, and they're processing elsewhere and coming back to Africa with products and with offering services. So what normally ends up happening is that exploitation. I'm happy that Christine touched a bit on that extractivism. Last 2022 or early 2023, I can't remember, WorldCoin actually went to Kenya and they were offering people $40 for their biometrics. So if you look at how much value they will generate just from your biometrics and getting $40, it's not really equivalent. So there's a lot of manipulation and that exploitation that takes place, especially from the big tech operating in Africa. And that is also another concern that African actors have. And the last point maybe I can also speak on is that absence of African data set. So in as much as scientists are working on data and they're coming up with solutions, some of the solutions are not always ideal or are not always going to meet African needs. I'll give an example. Earlier this year, we were working on a project on use of AI tools in primary education across Africa. And one of the issues that we picked up is actually some of the EdTech tools that we are importing and using, they're not reflecting African perspectives or African contexts. And we had an interview with a teacher who is based in rural Zimbabwe. And she was saying, yes, we want to use some of these tools, but some of the examples they give you, for example, can you describe a polar bear or a grizzly bear? Context-wise, it just doesn't add up. Our students don't even know what a polar bear looks like. So at least if it was a matter of draw a donkey or describe what a donkey looks like, within their context, it makes sense. And just the last point I also want to touch on, and Christy, I think you also mentioned the question of language. So you see a lot of AI tools, they predominantly use English language and not really African language. And we have over 2,000 African languages. And now we are in a situation where we are importing tools, AI tools, but majority of the people are not able to use these tools because they are in a different language. And even with generative AI, sometimes it's, at least now the data sets are improving. So we see more and more of our languages being reflected, but for the most part, we can't use these tools because they are not available in our local languages.
Thank you so much. So Asun, maybe I want to ask you to go a bit deeper into the European AI Act. It's the first attempt to go beyond self-regulation, which we know is not the solution. There seems to be growing consensus around that. AI Act, what are some of the possibilities? Kristen was saying maybe it will open new ways, but implementation challenges are large from your experience.
Thank you very much. And first of all, I'm absolutely delighted to be here. Thank you for including me in this 10th anniversary of the Bergen Exchange in San Juan. Let me start by making 3 points. So first of all, and you show it very well, to my mind, and to many people who have been following the process at the European level, it is extremely important to see the AI Act with critical eyes and not to forget the precursor documentation and work, which are precisely the ethical guidelines for trustworthy AI with all those principles. So the AI Act, and those were published in 2019. I was very happy to be part of the sort of consultation that they did. And then after they were done, the ethical guidelines, they did an analysis also in industry, trying to understand what will it take to make this accountable, what will it take to trustworthy. So this move from the ethical to the legal, the AI Act should not be forgotten. And there is a lot of critical voices that say that the way in which the AI Act has sort of materialized doesn't really capture a lot of the elements that were in the ethical guidelines. However, it's a remarkable piece of legislation. We need to understand that it's targeted not to people, it's targeted to industry and to companies and to AI developers and to those who implement AI. And it has some exceptions. It doesn't apply to the military, and I believe there is a couple of exceptions more, which are regulated differently. I think the most important issue is now, how do we implement this? And that is very, very difficult. So I want to make 2 points about challenges and potential solutions for the implementation. My colleagues in DNB in Norway, all of you who are from Norway, I work for the research department of the company DNB, which is owned by the foundation, the Veritas, which our business is assurance of all sorts of types of technology. And we have undergone a massive digital transformation like many other companies. And we are now into the idea of providing digital trust. And we have written a recommended practice, my colleagues, which tries to advise customers how to actually implement the AI. And one of the main arguments that are being made in this documentation, and we are not the only ones by any means, is that you cannot build a trustworthy a system that follows these regulations unless we bake in during the process of development the actual assurance and the actual accountability. Because once the black box is built, you cannot go back and say, well, wait a second, it ensures an appropriate degree of transparency. So we need to develop the AI algorithms with those legal frames in. So that's one thing. The second is my broader picture as a humanitarian, not a humanist, sorry, because I'm a philosopher of science and ethicist and sociologist of knowledge, a very eclectic career. And that is that I don't think it's possible to actually implement the AI Act in the absence of understanding that this is part of the digital transformation. In the EU, you cannot decouple the AI Act with the Data Act, with GDPR, which has already been mentioned, and with other efforts to regulate the digital world. In reality, a lot of the problems about unfairness and discrimination is very clear. I mean, I think your example of the Bergen exchanges is brilliant. Why did ChatGPT give this very nice description? Because somebody has written it, because it's right there, right? So we cannot, as algorithms, they're looking and using the data that we already have. So if the data is wrong, if the data discriminates against gender, then you are going to get the solution. So let's focus, I think, less on the actual algorithms and look at the system. And I think, Christine, your presentation was absolutely brilliant because that's exactly the last point that you make there, right? We need to look at the multiplicity of this. We need to be looking at the connections. And we need the type of analysis, the interdisciplinary type of analysis, which in the field of humanitarian aid you present. We need that in all the other sectors. We need to look at it from the actual mistakes within the system, the possibilities to actually implement this in society.
Thank you so much. Let me quickly go for a second round of questions. I think we're good in time. Melody, you're particularly concerned with how AI can further social inequalities. That's what moves your agenda, your peers. Can you share some of your insights?
Okay. So I think just to pick on from what you've said, that we cannot separate AI from digital transformation. So it's a complete package. So what we see happening is a lot of discussion now is mainly focused on AI, and we are forgetting about digital transformation. And I think we need to take a step back and start talking about digital transformation and talking about how best can we address some of the digital divides that we have. And coming back again to the context of Africa, where internet penetration is still very low. Most areas, especially in remote and rural areas, they are underserved. So most areas, I come from a region where there is no fiber cable. And if you want to use broadband, there are certain areas where you actually have to go and be able to use your phone, especially if you want to use WhatsApp and to make a WhatsApp call. So before we even talk about AI, I think we need to take that step back and start looking at how best can we address the existential digital divide that we have. Let's focus on internet penetration. How do we make sure that we invest more in infrastructure? How do we invest more in fiber and broadband? And not only that, there is that question again of affordability. Does everyone afford data? I know in I think it was 2023, my South African colleagues can correct me, but a few years ago, in South Africa, there was a protest on data must fall because it was so expensive to be online. And that was during the time of COVID, where everything was being done online. So already that was excluding a certain group of people who cannot afford to be online. So the issue of affordability, looking at the cost of internet, the cost of data, devices themselves. How many people can afford smartphones? How many people can afford computers? Because all the issues that we talk about with AI, even if I want to innovate, I still need the devices. I still need to be connected. And that's where the challenge at the moment is at. And I think we need to go back and essentially look at that. And then the other issue again is that of digital skills. I was talking to my colleague here who was explaining to me that you'd be surprised how many people still don't know how to use computers and Microsoft Word or Excel. So it's something that we take for granted because we already know how to use this thing. So we assume everyone else is digitally literate, but that's not the case. So that in itself is a problem. And the more we are talking about AI, I feel like we are leaving digitally illiterate people behind. And it's something that we need to think about. And the other issue, again, especially with gender, women and girls, if you look, there's been research done where they're looking at who actually has access to digital devices and who's spending more time online. You see it's mostly boys and men who have phones who spend more time online. And already there we are excluding women, we are excluding girls from participating and benefiting from digital transformation. So the first point, just to summarize, is we definitely need to address the existential problems that we have. And then I won't touch much because you already mentioned with the foundational data itself, because a lot of algorithmic data bias that we talk about, it comes down to the data. At the point of collection of data, what kind of data are we collecting? So if we are going to collect data that is predominantly from European actors, and we are developing solutions and using the services and solutions we develop for an African market, will that work? Probably not. So I think we need also to come back to the situation where we are talking to data scientists to say, well, we need to actually make sure that the data that you are collecting is representative of different demographics, because what is happening now from the research, I'm not a scientist, so from the research that I've been reading from the likes of Joy or something, and she's a data scientist, and she's been looking at bias, especially gender and racial bias. And big companies like IBM, Microsoft, Google have actually been doing that. They've been racially biased, and there's been bias towards especially Black women. So coming back to foundational data itself, making sure that we apply these ethical principles and we make sure that it's representative of different demographics.
Thank you, Melody. I'm going to cut you down there. Digital gap and algorithmic bias in 3 minutes, wonderfully covered. Thank you. But I want to give Asun the word now because there are also sustainability concerns, potential and concerns around AI.
Right. So there is a big movement. It's called AI for good, AI and sustainability, AI and climate change, because definitely this digital transformation is here to stay. A lot of these skills are very data heavy. They are already computerized. Climate models are completely dependent on supercomputing capabilities, etc. So there's quite a lot of potential, but there is also quite a lot of risk that this is going to happen as some sort of a miracle. And of course, then we have the sustainability problem of the environmental cost that we have in how much energy it costs to train the models, to maintain the data centers and the feature agent, and so on and so forth. what I wanted to say is that I think the biggest problem that I see is that the largest amount of innovation going into AI is not going towards AI for good topics. It's going towards how to sell us more things, how to make sure that they harvest data from us. And I think this is the biggest problem. And the biggest line of defense to me is actually our critical thinking skills. I mean, ChatGPT is very useful, but if you let ChatGPT to think for you, we are in serious trouble. So I think it is always this sort of human control, both as individuals at the individual level, as consumers, but also as activists and in any field to make sure that it is actually human criteria, what it actually makes the decisions. So I think that exploring a lot more, not only the systemic, but also the sort of human aspect to it is fundamentally important. Because otherwise we will left to be convinced that, oh, AI can do that, and without looking at the system, whether it works or it doesn't work, it's not going to make any difference. So I'm very glad that you talk about the digital divide. The UN is really investing quite a lot, UNDP and so on, in digital programs in relation to development. But it's a long way.
Well, thank you. So this is the talk about the human in the loop, human on the loop, so it has to be human-centered. Marija, maybe, you know, and I really love you propose this question because, you know, obviously this is scary, but obviously there's a lot of potential for good. The different question is where we put the money in making these choices. But you wanted to talk about the costs of not pursuing AI. And I think this is a very interesting question.
So, I mean, good that we said these questions before, because then I would have liked to jump in a lot of what Nori said, but maybe I can combine them anyway. The most precious resource right now is, and this is a controversial opinion, humans, right? So the thing is, we are running out of people. If we want to have a society, and I'm not going to align with Elon Musk here, let's everybody hate me, have 9 children, not really the point. My point is, if we want to have a society in which 1% lives in luxury, supported by the hard labor of 90% and 9% having, you know, like good enough lives not to complain, then we have enough humans, no problem. But if we want to have a planet in which most people, if we want to live in a post-scarcity society, if we want to have a planet in which everybody lives in a post-scarcity society, then we need technology to do the jobs that human beings shouldn't be doing, right? That we cannot pay people to do, because if we cannot pay living wages for people to do, because otherwise they become too unsustainable in the market sense. So what do I mean by that? You want to have strawberries, you want the strawberries to be fresh, you want the strawberries to be ripe, you want the strawberries to be picked down the road from you. You don't want to import immigrants that live in horrible work conditions to pick those strawberries and treat them in inhuman ways. Then how do you pick the strawberries, right? Are you going to pay 50 euros per kilo of strawberries? No, you won't. You need the technology. There is a way to do that. And one way to do that is to use technology to do this. I'm not saying at the expense of human lives and human well-being, but for having better lives and better lives. And right now, what nobody talks about aloud, except a few investigative journalists here and there, is that the current development of AI is done on the backs of countless people in the global south that clean the data. ChatGPT speaks with a Nigerian voice. It's like, it's the data cleaning happens in Africa, in Venezuela. There was the story that broke out a few weeks ago that the checkout baskets, the automatic checkout that was done in some supermarkets in the US, it was actually some Indian people being hired to do it digitally, right? So the question is, what does it, let me go back to after this, I had to, sorry. After this, what is the cost of not using AI? The cost of not using AI or some kind of a technology to sustain us is being locked into this scarcity society in which in order for one group of people to have everything, a larger group of people has to have very little. And we have seen throughout the development of our societies, the planet in the past 200 years, is that the way we walked out from working 24 hours to 16 hours to 8 hours is by automating quite a lot of the tasks that we do. And what AI does, it automates fragments of our cognitive processes. I'm not saying that the way we should do it is by burning down the planet to build these supercomputers. That's one way to do it. It's the way that, the Americans have chosen to do it. There might be other ways to do it. That's the beautiful thing about technology. It serves us. It has to serve us. And we have to use it in order to advance us. And we don't want to have more and more and more and more people on this planet. What we want to have is less and less and less bright people. So I will leave it at that because I want to hear questions. I think everybody does.
Okay, so we are running very nicely on time. So let's start throwing the microphone around.
That would be very short. Thank you so much. If you want to provide one objective, basically policy budget and providing. But now, how are we going to improve education when we have a team who is going to school where there's no electricity? And we are saying AI is the future. The student hasn't seen a computer in his or her whole life. So my point is, what Melo is saying, I think we need to take this seriously because if we really want us to end the problem of poverty, let us help equality in terms of access. That's my point.
And it's okay. Fantastic panel. Thank you so much. So I have two questions. One is, you first mentioned the different models of how we're thinking about AI regulation. So the individualistic model, the EU model. So I wonder if you all could comment on the geopolitical battles of AI regulation, because now other countries are suffering kind of the influence of EU and the United States and China to regulate in a way to mirror their own preferences. So this has been the case of Brazil that has an AI bill that really mirrors the EU regulation, but it is still open for debate whether this serves to the interests of who. So more on the geopolitical battles, I would love to hear on that. And also on the point of inequality, one thing that we're talking about is inequality of access, right? So people that don't have access to computers, et cetera. And I think that's a really major point. Another thing that I would love to hear about is inequality on the concepts that are inscribed in regulation. So when you think about GDPR and the regulation of privacy, we think about consent. And consent is such a different concept for different regions and different countries, and also very hard to grasp in certain cultures what consent deeply means. So I wonder if AI, we're also doing in AI regulation, also inscribing concepts that can further inequality if they're not think through. So thanks. Yeah.
Thank you, great. So I just wanted to ask about the presentation, right? So all of us have dealt with the buzzword figure. And I've been doing sort of convening conversations with NGOs and then I've been running around like a happy idiot talking about hallucination, frontier AI, foundational AI, postman data, blah, blah, blah. And then there's a whole critical literature here. There's a whole critical literature here. I mean, when I use hallucinations or frontier AI or foundational AI, that's a major win for some tech actors. I don't think the tech is neutral. I don't necessarily think that this tech is good. I mean, I don't think that OpenAI is a wonderful entity. So how do we think critically while unpacking this? I mean, safety is really the big winner of the AI rhetoric discourse. What does safety mean in human care and space? What about safety and law and rights, for example? You know, if you insist on talking about safety, you can just put a lot of other things aside. So how do we do this critical thinking while actually, you know, being part of the conversation? Oh, I mean,
Thank you, caught it this time. Anyway, thank you for this conversation. It's really disturbing and exciting. And I guess I'm wondering, one of the solutions that's often proposed is to put humans back in the loop, right? So the AI does its thing and then humans check, you know, whether it looks plausible. But part of the reason why AI works is because it does things humans can't do. And so I'm thinking of one of the grand unchecked uses that really disturbs me, and that is that the war in Gaza is being conducted by a military that's using AI to develop the targets. If you haven't seen this, just Google 972 and lavender, because that was the investigative report in the Israeli press that discovered that there. And so, and then the Israelis are saying, well, we don't have time to check all the targets, assuming that if they did, this would still be legitimate. But what are you checking when you're checking the results of more data than a human can process? I mean, I guess I'm wondering how, if the corrective is, let's put humans in the loop to check the output to see whether it makes sense, or to do what Ruth did at the beginning, which is the reason why if you put in Bergen exchanges, you can figure out how close it is because we know a lot. Okay, but in the vast majority of uses for which AI is being deployed, no one knows that much. That's exactly why you need that much data to generate results. So I guess I'm wondering how that kind of mantra of putting people in the loop is actually supposed to fix things when humans can't check that much data.
A great panel. Thanks for the contribution. So two quick questions. So one on the AI Act, and it's great, Asun, you're working on the certification, sort of conformity assessments that are there, and it's perhaps better than the GDPR system for certification. One thing that really worries me about the AI Act is it's, what I've argued is it's highly distributed governance mechanisms, where you've got this very much private sector space with conformative assessments, but there's no feedback mechanisms into the market surveillance authorities, which is likely to be data protection authorities, and into this sort of European woolly governance system that sits in Brussels. And so we don't really know how to regulate AI yet, but I'm not sure the AI Act gives us a sort of what I've argued, like adaptive sort of form to actually adjust governance over time. So given you're at the coalface, I'm really interested in your thoughts on that. And secondly, on technology and inequality, I think technology can be highly liberational. With the printing press, for example, and many of us are working on projects that use AI to improve law and other things. But once you increase scale with technology, you tend to often get an increase in income and wealth inequality. And if you look at who's at the top of the share market index at the moment, it's tech companies. You know, they've overtaken the oil and energy companies. So in embracing AI, can we actually hope for any liberational dimensions within inequality, or it's actually going to be just part of the package?
Say something. This is your last chance. We'll give it back to you.
Okay, well, we're good on time.
Yes.
So you can comment on all the questions and selectively. Maybe I'm gonna start by Asun.
So let me start with the critical thinking. I think the answer is that the big problem with that wonderful possibility of technology is that this field is totally dominated by tech people.
American
There is
tech
nothing wrong-
people and Chinese tech people,
There
be
is-
specific.
Right, but even in Norway, right? I mean, you go to universities, who are the students applying in the data science programs in Bergen, in Trondheim? It is dominated by tech people, it's dominated. And entering at this discussion as an interdisciplinary perspective, from the law perspective, from the philosophy, it becomes very difficult. So we need huge amounts of new research projects that look at specific problems from multidisciplinary perspectives and bring in the critical thinking of especially the interpretative sciences, which are the social sciences and the humanities. So there is all this AI ethics, that's another conversation. It's I think lots of category mistakes there, but to me, that is not enough. We really need this domain knowledge in specific issues. Again, the example of the humanitarian aid is one, but many others. And then I also wanted to say, because I think you are completely right about AI is doing things humans cannot do. Right. I mean, it's just crunching numbers, it's impossible for humans to do without the supercomputers and so on. And what are the limits to that and how much we can control? And I think we should not lose sight of the sort of AI as an existential risk, which is also a big movement. And that existential risk is not necessarily because of the big AI dominating the world type of dystopia, but also related to the inability to control and therefore the inability to certify and to account. And then lastly, on the AI Act, Malcolm, I just can only agree with you and go back to the idea that the AI Act is just one piece of the game, and it should be seen as one piece of the game, and that we need to be seen the systemic perspective. So there is quite a lot of work to do. Now, is this a problem of the AI Act? Or is that we want one regulation to be able to do something? I don't know, I'm not a lawyer, but probably that's not the case, right? So I think we need to see this as one element on a potential pathway, but only one element that is dependent on multiple other perspectives.
Okay. Yes, so I wanted to touch upon the digital access inequality thing. It's a great point, but the question is, how do we make progress in it? I come from a country where people still do farming with oxen with smartphones, right? Smartphone in one hand, farming the field with the oxen, and from Macedonia and the Balkans. And I imagine that a lot of pockets in Africa look exactly the same. Not to say that it's the same. The thing is that one of the roles of GPT that is completely ignored is that it's not a search engine, it's not a question answering machine. It's an interface that allows people who have no knowledge of how computers work to use computation to a certain degree. And we saw this, how big the divide of the digital resources is. The internet is more than 50% English. Second place is Spanish with less than 5%. And then everybody else, right? So we see that. So the question is, what interventions can we do to increase the access to the technology? And I don't mean by that just devices, because dumping devices to people, that's not a solution. But access, using this technology, like helping people to speak their own language and integrate these tools to better themselves in a good way. And this is not all or nothing. It's not like we stop everything until everybody in the planet is at the same level of digital development. That's, great if we can make it happen, but most likely no. So we need to think of critical approaches to this. There was we are packing so many things together when we are having these conversations. We're talking about military use, we are talking about use in education, medical use, everything. And we are scientists and we have to unpack the issues. And the big problem here is that there is so much we do not understand. There are gaps in human-to-human relations knowledge, and there are definitely gaps in human-to-machine relations knowledge. And the last thing I would like to say in response, critical thinking is great, but I don't think that this is where we should put all our eggs in, because we all have lives to live, and expecting people to get PhDs in AI or PhDs in philosophy in order to be able to deal with things, that's just insane, right? When I go to the supermarket in Norway, I don't spend time checking the expiration dates on the products. And the reason I don't do this is because I have a good confidence in the society in Norway that there is a system who is going to make it up to me if something has gone wrong. That first, when something goes wrong, that's an accident. And second, that I have a recourse, right? I can go to the store, return the goods and say, can you please pick my money? In Macedonia, still European country, my mother calls me on the phone and says, check the expiration dates. I know you won't, right? And she's right, I won't. And there, when you buy the product in the store, it may not be an accident that it is expired. It's up to you to pay attention. And they take so much energy to do this all the time, and we cannot do it for everything. So we need governance that takes this cognitive burden away from people. The informed consent ended up being a manipulation and a harassment trick for companies to punish you for wanting to keep their data away from you. We need solutions that are, sorry, I would say more technological in this sense, but checked and certified by people that don't take more time away from people, but give time.
I'm going to give the word to Melody, and maybe there's still, maybe you want to, actually, we have time. Do you want to
Yeah.
respond
Can
to this?
Can I
Melody,
respond to
and then-
that? So I didn't want to sound anti-technology at all, but I think the risk of technology optimism being the solving of everything, it's something that in the field of climate change I learned it's a big problem that is stopping us from the real proper transformation, which is a transformation of values and choices as human beings and as societies and as governments. To the technology and to that, I think that, because you are completely right, I think one of the interesting things of tools like ChatGPT, which is large language models, the LLMs, is that you need to train the model in a particular language. And I think a wonderful advance is in Norway, there is a project, I think it's an SFI, called Norway, is already developing a ChatGPT in Norwegian. This is happening in Spanish. This is happening in Catalan in Spain. So I think we need to invest quite a lot in localizing these type of tools. And I think that large language models is just one wonderful example. And lastly, it's not that all X need to be in critical thinking. Actually, it's the opposite argument. Actually, I think we need to be able to open up this field out of the technology only type of competencies, right? I mean, what are the skills of the future? Just Google it. The skills of the future. Do we want everybody to have a PhD in data science? No. Do we all probably should understand better what coding is? Yes.
We understand better what ethics is also.
And we also, exactly. So it is this going back to this sort of liberal, like used to be the liberal arts education in the United States, which we don't have in Europe, right? So we need people with multiple skills and with their head being able to be seen from the perspective of the system. So the system view, you don't only need to be a system dynamics expert or read Donella Meadows. You just need to be able to position yourself and to change our personality. But I'm a pro-tech,
yeah,
but careful, because it's not going to solve
Normally the
everything.
pessimist in this conversation is a very new role for me.
Melody.
Okay, so I think I'll touch on the question of geopolitics, because I think that's the question that we haven't addressed. So I think in my opening remarks, that's where I was kind of taking the discussion to say, when we're talking about global AI governance, normally African voices or global South majority voices are not actually heard. And I think it's something that became very prominent with the GDPR, where we saw a lot of companies in Africa adopting the GDPR, even if they were operating in context where there was no national law on data protection. And the concern there is, of course, European context and African context are very different. And now we are coming and kind of exporting all these principles on how to govern data within a context where it's not always reflective. And I see that's the challenge we may end up having now that we have the EU AI Act, because of course, if multinationals are operating in Africa, they would always go for the EU AI Act or EU regulations, because the EU is considered as the standards taker, as the standards setter, and Africans, we end up as standards takers. And if we look, for example, here, I was thinking the question of accountability. And it's a principle that we say AI systems must be accountable. If you are developing an AI system, you must be accountable. if a solution has been developed in Europe and all we are doing is consuming, if there is going to be harm down the line, how can we hold someone who is not in Africa accountable? So I think within our context, that's where we need to actually start thinking, how do we unpack the question of responsible AI accountability? How do we hold someone that is outside of our jurisdiction accountable? And I think we need to think more around that. And of course, some African governments, of course, because they are importing their tools from the likes of China, there is also that fear that, well, we might have a model where there's social scoring because that's what is happening in China. And if we're adopting these surveillance technologies, there is that fear. And I can give an example of my country, Zimbabwe, when they started their digital transformation and efforts to build their smart cities or cyber cities, they were collecting biometric data. And the company that was collecting that data is a Chinese company. They came in, they collected data. No one knows what they did with their data. No one knows what happened to their data, even after who they shared the data with. So there's always that constant fear, especially within Africa, like how is geopolitics going to influence how we develop our regulation? Of course, countries like Kenya, which work a lot more with the EU, there is that perception that they may end up be adopting laws or regulations that are similar to what is happening here in Europe, but we remain to see that playing out. And then just to make a comment on your point, Malcolm, with inequality and what everyone else was talking about, I think the approach that the ITU takes on AI for good is the best way to approach it, because yes, AI is not going to do away with all our problems, but it's going to help us to deal with issues of poverty. We can use AI to have new skills and have new jobs. We can use AI to improve our education system. Now with climate change, we can use AI tools to mitigate against climate change, to improve food security. So I think it's just about identifying, I would say, use cases where we can leverage AI for the good or the betterment of our lives. And that's the best way to approach it. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to also ask you to have one final thought.
Well, my final thought is that the governance of AI is the governance of the digital transformation.
I would say that we are all morally immature if we think that there is a simple or one discipline-based solution to things. They're always complex. We have to unpack the issues. We can't just keep talking about them as if they were one and the same stuff.
Melody.
I would say when we are thinking about AI, we should not leave anyone behind.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you so much.
Wow.
Thank you.
Thank you.